Prayer to me has always been a source of encouragement. You know, I go throughout my day, and the idea of practicing that presence of God and constantly communicating with Him, constantly talking to Him, what I found is that as I go throughout my day, as I look around, I can see the blessings He has. And because I'm in contact with Him, I can thank Him for that. And what it's done is that in spite of bad things, by communicating with Him, by praying to God, and spending that time constantly aware of His presence and His blessings, it's really been a support in times when trouble comes.
John Newton was the author of many hymns, including Amazing Grace. It is amazing to see how grace and transformation breathe out from his poetry. In one of his most admired thoughts, Newton wrote, "I am not what I ought to be. Ah, how imperfect and deficient. I am not what I wish to be. I abhor what is evil, and I would cleave to what is good. I am not what I hope to be. Soon, soon I shall put off mortality, and with mortality all sin and imperfection. Yet though I am not what I ought to be, nor what I wish to be, nor what I hope to be, I can truly say I am not what I once was, a slave to sin and Satan. And I can heartily join with the apostle and acknowledge, by the grace of God, I am what I am." What an amazing writing. This process of transformation, as described by John Newton, illustrates beautifully Jesus' desire in His supplication found in His priestly prayer in John 17. After praying for Himself, Jesus then begins to pray for His disciples. As we have seen before, He intercedes that His followers be protected from disunity. Christ also prays that they can live the fullness and happiness that heaven gives. However, now, Jesus is interceding that His followers understand this process of transformation, which is the process we have come to know as sanctification. This process has nothing to do with a perfect life without sin, but rather with the understanding of living a life in loving obedience to God. Here are found Christ's words in John 17. "I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also may be sanctified by the truth." God could take us to heaven the moment we were saved. However, He leaves us here on earth so that we may develop and grow and make a difference in the world in which we live. In this process, we see risks, of course. And for this reason, Christ prays for protection against the evil that the world offers. We cannot deny that the world is our home, but we do not belong to the world. Although the world is the object of our mission, it should not be the Lord of our affections. We must live in the world, but the world must not live in us. This distinction separates us as strangers and pilgrims on this earth, heading to the promised land. It is interesting to see the connection between the believers and the world in Jesus' prayer in John 17. In verse 6, Jesus is teaching that the believers were given from the world. In verses 11 to 15, the believers were left in the world. In verse 14, the believers do not belong to the world and that they are hated by the world. In verse 15, it says that the believers should be kept, protected from the world's evil one and ways. In verse 18, that the believers should be sent to the world, and in verse 20, that the believers preach Jesus, his word, to the world. In no time during this reading do we see the believers being of this world. On the contrary, we see the call for them to go to the world. Jesus' prayer is for protection for his followers while they are in the world. Protection against temptation and the evil forces. Now let's make something very clear. To be protected does not mean to be kept outside the world. We cannot make the same mistakes as the children of Israel did to try and create an exclusive world. Ellen White writes in Acts of the Apostles, "The people of Israel lost sight of their high privileges as God's representatives. They forgot God and failed to fulfill their holy mission. The blessings they received brought no blessing to the world. All their advantages they appropriated for their own glorification. They shut themselves away from the world in order to escape temptation. The restrictions that God had placed upon their association with idolaters as a means of preventing them from conforming to the practices of the heathen, they used to build up a wall of separation between themselves and all other nations. They robbed God of the service he required of them, and they robbed their fellow men of religious guidance and a holy example. Salt only has effect outside of the salt shaker. However, God needs to preserve us, his salt, that which is in the world and not of the world. For this to happen, we now look at Christ's second important request found in John 17:17. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. To sanctify means to separate, to dedicate completely to God's use. So again, being separated out for God includes much more than just being separated from the world. It is to be equipped to do his work and to continue in him. It is this whole process of spiritual development that is many times talked about as a daily walk with God that really only happens through prayer and Bible study. It is only through this daily communion with the Creator that we remain faithful, even though we live in this world and still reach out to the world. So do you understand what God expects from you as his follower? That you do not fall into the traps and snares of this world, but that you make a difference in this world? Do you fully understand that only by being in daily communion with God can we be faithful to his mission for us? Are you willing to daily separate time to be with God, to make a difference where you live, work, and study? Why don't you cry out to God at this very moment? Pray that he conserves you to be able to be a faithful light to this world. And as you pray, remember that prayer is the key in the hand of faith to unlock heaven's storehouse where are treasured the boundless resources of omnipotence.